I'm the Space Quest historian. You know what time it is, Bessie? Here's another bunch of games that I didn't ask for, but somehow ended up on my hard drive anyway. Now, I had 10 games on my list, but there's no way I'm doing 10 now, because I was actually planning to have this video out before Christmas 2025, and, well, it's March 2026 now, so you tell me where that falls on the expert time management scale. So, sorry to anyone who's still waiting out there. I will get around to your game at some point. Also, bear in mind as I go through each of these games that they might have been updated or revised since I played them a few months ago. No, I didn't bother to go back and check if they got any better since last time I played them. Think of these as a moment frozen in time. This was the state they were in when I played them, and if they seem interesting to you, then go and check them out for yourself. You don't have to take my word for anything. Anyway, a quick rundown of the rules in case this is your first time watching one of these videos. These are not full reviews, these are just my first impressions. I only played these games for as long as I felt like, and I'm only judging them by what I saw. One or more of these games might be stone cold masterpieces if I just stuck with them longer, but we'll never know. Also, I am not a journalist, and I'm under no obligation to be fair or impartial, so you should take my recommendations with a grain of salt as you should with any random dude on the internet who says so and so. And most importantly, I only look at games that have been sent to me unsolicited. I don't know these devs, and they sure as shit don't know me very well either. I told all of them what it is I do here and how they may not like what I had to say about their games, and I gave them every opportunity to back out, and they chose to let me have a crack at their games anyway. So joke's on them. Here we go. Let's get cracking. What's better than being cooped up with extended family members in a tiny desert town with a population of less than 10 people? Having to run around and pretend to give a shit about their fishing tournaments and police donut discounts while being teased about a murder mystery and a government conspiracy that honestly doesn't sound a whole hell of a lot more interesting, that's what. The presentation at least sells the mood very well. The graphics are the type of flat-shaded, low-poly 3D where characters barely have any faces and the lighting does most of the heavy lifting. And the music is the sort of folksy acoustic guitar strumming that sounds like a youth camp counselor jamming around the campfire. If any of that is the sort of shit that floats your houseboat, then you'll love the atmosphere of this game. I didn't, but that's because I hate small desert towns and acoustic guitars. And it didn't fucking help that the music got copyright flagged in my playthrough video over on my second channel, which brought back very uncomfortable rednecks memories. This isn't a knock on the dev, who replied to me on Blue Sky saying they are similarly disappointed and will never work with the composer again, but that is what it is. My advice to other streamers and YouTubers who want to play this game is to turn the music off completely. You're not missing out on much anyway. Anyway, the first thing you'll notice is that our main character here walks like someone jammed a firecracker down her socks. She is out of control, especially if you hold down the left mouse button to make her run. The game is full of these little unintentionally hilarious moments. I mean, look at dear old uncle here pouring coffee down the side of his face. Or this car casually running over our protagonist on their way to gas up their car. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention our main character's name. It's, Anyway, the primary mechanic of this game is to get an assignment from your aunt, who is also the local newspaper editor, then go and collect information about the story as well as snap a picture for the article. Your first assignment is to cover the riveting controversy surrounding the annual fishing tour. Oh shit, sorry, I blacked out there for a second. Once you've checked off all the necessary requirements on your list of journalistic objectives, you go back to the bustling newspaper office to write your article. This seems like a fun mechanic at first, especially since you're given the option to insert your own text in addition to the predefined text the game obviously wants you to insert, but there's a very strict word limit and you're expected to include all of the information you've required, which leaves very little room for creative embellishment on the player's part. Still, I made the most of it. One thing I found really useful is that you can go through all the characters in your little Rolodex here to see if new conversation topics have opened up, which not only makes good sense as a narrative device and a gameplay device, but it also cuts down significantly on having to do the rounds and bother every NPC you've ever met in the hopes that they might prod you forward. Because one of the things I really hate about doing the rounds is that when a new conversation topic opens up, it sometimes comes as a bit of a surprise, like the protagonist is ahead of the player and is just waiting for you to catch up. Here it feels like the protagonist thought of something to ask another character and jotted it down in her notebook, so new dialogue topics don't just come out of left field when you go talk to other characters. Does that make any sense? I hope it does. Anyway, this is something I hope more adventure games in the future take on board as a good mechanic. It also functions as a sort of indirect objective list, because this lets you know whether or not the game expects you to go talk to someone because a new conversation topic opened up, or if it wants you to fuck off and go solve some actual puzzles. And the puzzles themselves aren't too bad, at least not the ones I encountered during the 2 hours I spent playing this. But I did resort to the in-game hint system on a few occasions, mostly because I just wanted to get shit rolling in the hope that something interesting might finally happen. And this in-game hint system is, well, it's your mom. You can call your mom, and she's psychic, so she intuitively knows what your current obstacle is and can nudge you in the right direction. It, doesn't really work for me. Sure, it's cute, but first of all, I hate all this beaded curtain shit, and second and most importantly, unlike the Rolodex thing, it doesn't work on a narrative level. If my mom was spouting shit about cubes and ovals or telling me how to use the right mouse button over the phone, I'd have her commit it. Just give me a standard UHS-style hint system and stick to trying to tell an actual story, which, I gotta be honest, doesn't seem like a top priority for this game. It kicks off with a bold promise of mystery, intrigue, and murder most foul, but then when you actually get into playing the game, it sends you off to investigate a local fishing tournament. But okay, they want to ease you into the world and get to know the characters first. I get it, we're in for the slow burn. So I stick with it. Day 2 arrives, and this slimy prick in the sofa even starts telling me about the mystery plot, which to me sounded like we were finally gonna get to the juicy shit, and then 10 minutes later, I found myself stuck running around trying to cook blue food for the local police force. And after an hour of that shit and no mystery development in sight, I was like, fuck this, I'm out. There's taking things slow and building suspense, and then there's just dicking people around. And I gotta be honest, the mystery doesn't even sound that interesting, at least not from what I learned in the short time I played the game. Obviously, I haven't played far enough to actually unravel any of the mystery because I was off running around the game world looking for, and I shit you not, a fucking schnitzel. But from what these characters are saying, there's some shit about a meteor crashing, some military dudes quarantining the area because of all the radiation, and then a dead body turning up in the lake covered in radiation, and call me crazy, but it feels like we've heard that story a million times before. It sounds like the premise to one of those Monster of the Week episodes of The X-Files, and not one of the good ones. In the end, it wasn't enough to keep me going. The mystery honestly didn't sound very interesting to me, and even if it had been tantalizing as all hell, it still seemed like it was so far out of reach and much less important than cooking schnitzels that I honestly stopped giving a shit before it had a chance to unfold itself. So, would I recommend this game? Look, I'm sure this near comatose vibe and autumny color palette and kumbaya music appeals to someone, but that someone isn't me. If it's you, then sure, go ahead and play it. I'm not your mom. You can make decisions for yourself. But if you ask me, it feels like the game wants to bank on two very disparate target audiences, those that are intrigued by mystery and adventure, and those who just want to run around a small town decorating clotheslines with Christmas lights and taking photos of fishing boats. And as much as the game is fairly competently put together on the presentation side, especially considering it was put together by essentially a one-man development team, it just felt like it was far more interested in the boring shit than the exciting shit, and as a result, I just lost interest. Next, please. Okay, this one's a bit of an odd duck. I'm not even sure I'd call this an adventure game, at least not in the classical sense. It's more of an exploration game with some puzzles thrown in occasionally, and by puzzles, I mean the same goddamn puzzle every time. This is Greta. She sees ghosts. More specifically, her job apparently is to wander around deserted islands looking for wisps of ghostly activity with her incredibly loud magical lantern. And when she sees one of these wispy little clouds of ectoplasmic farts, it means she's either found a ghost or a place where a ghost wants to be. All of the ghosts in this game have apparently wandered off and gotten lost, and getting them back to the place where they feel most at home is apparently Greta's problem. The glowing lights puzzle seems to be the only type of puzzle in the game, at least for the two ghosts you're able to catch in the demo, which feels like it's going to get very repetitive if that's all you're going to be doing in the full game. But the real problem is actually finding these ghosts. There are no hints as to where they might be hiding or any environmental breadcrumbs that you might be able to follow. All you can do is wander around aimlessly until this little wispy fart cloud appears, and that's literally all you can do. You can't interact with any of the objects in the environment, even though there's plenty of them. You can't move anything or pick anything up or even look at stuff and get some sort of humorous description. There's literally nothing to do except walk around this very, very large map and hope you'll stumble into one of these little plumes of ghostly flatulence. And if that sounds boring and tedious, it's because it very much is. Very, very much. As I said, there's no hints or directions of where to go. It's just a lot of walking and not a lot of interacting. And when the game finally decides to do a bit of puzzle solving, it's just the same goddamn puzzle over and over again. I think the developers were banking on the humorous dialogue to carry the experience, but the dialogue isn't as humorous as they think. It's mostly cringy dad humor, like this guy who tossed himself off a cliff to impress a girl and drowned, and then when you put him on the phone with the girl he was trying to impress, he turns out to be a psychic, and she's like, yeah, that happens all the time. Okay? Or this dude who accidentally murdered everyone on the island because he cooked up a batch of poisonous mushroom stew, but he seems more interested in checking his emails. It's not funny. It really wants to be funny, but it just comes across as kind of stupid, to be honest, and also a bit tone-deaf and disrespectful towards the subject matter. Not to mention, the demo is pretty fucking buggy. The game insists that you use a controller instead of your mouse and keyboard, but the input handling is all shades of fucked up. Most of the time you have to hold down a button in order to do something, but single pressing a button seems to set off a series of rapid-fire inputs like you're playing with an auto-fire controller, so trying to access the in-game map or bringing up the main menu is impossible since the game thinks you're trying to open it and close it immediately at the same time at fucking light speed. The graphics are charming in a sort of MS Paint style with some nice lighting effects, but that's really all I can say about the game. The sound of Greta's lantern clanking away with every step she takes gets on your nerves really fast, and while the music isn't terrible, it's just the same tune looping over and over again, and trust me, you'll be hearing this tune a lot since 90% of the time you'll just be walking around in circles looking for something to do. All in all, this feels more like a tech demo than an actual game, and the writing simply isn't funny enough to keep you going through the very simplistic and repetitive gameplay. It's a nice idea for a game in theory, and if there was more variety to the gameplay and more stuff to interact with while you're burning shoe leather, it might have something, but at least as far as the demo is concerned, this is just boring as hell. Would I recommend? Not in its current state. If the developers flesh out the game to be more than just a scavenger hunt and the same repetitive puzzle over and over again, maybe they'll have something, but what the demo has to offer is just fucking boring and tedious, and it doesn't make me want to play the full game. Right? Next! Not much to say about this one, unfortunately. You play as Hana, a young girl who goes searching in the local forest for her friend Yuki because he got lost or some shit. It's never made entirely clear why he went there or how he had time to send her a letter if he supposedly got lost, or why this frog is wearing a flasher's jacket but not any pants. As you can tell, this game is very obviously inspired by the works of Hayao Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli, complete with woodland spirits that need appeasing and an environmental message, and it falls short in every respect. The story makes no sense. The writing is abysmal and full of spelling errors. Salads? You pick solids. I do love some solids. Can I have some more solids? There's almost no feedback when you try to interact with the environment, and the whole message about being kind to the forest and respecting nature falls completely flat because the whole game is made with generative AI. Would I recommend? Fuck no. Support real artists. Get fucked. Next. Well, here we fucking go. This game had my interest piqued right from the description. It's a detective game set in a spooky mansion that keeps changing and warping around you because the main character's lost his fucking mind. That's not a spoiler, that's in the actual Steam description. Now, if you think that sounds a lot like Layers of Fear, that's because it is. I'll knock some points off for originality here, but I also love a good mindfuck story, and the game has lofty promises of an enticing mystery full of dread and reality warping, an impressive amount of replay value, and most importantly, no jump scares. So I went into this with a fair bit of uncharacteristic optimism. That optimism quickly died down a few notches when the protagonist, who is supposed to be a detective in Birmingham, England, speaks with a weird foreign accent and a laughably gravelly voice that sounds like he's doing a bad impression of Duke Nukem.
I still wonder, how come no one reported the wrapped body that was laying in the street for almost a day?
But okay, maybe the protagonist is an immigrant from another country, that's always a possibility. Would be a nice bit of representation too, to be honest, but his name is James, which seems to imply he's English. And things fall apart completely when his captain, who is presumably also English, phones him up and also has a weird foreign accent.
I want this case to close once and for all. I gave you all the clues needed yesterday.
I'm assuming it's the developers themselves doing the voices, and, you know, English isn't my first language either, so pot to kettle and all that, but it does break the immersion quite a bit. It doesn't help that, as the game goes on, the dialogue very much seems like it was written by people who don't speak English very well, but figured if they just used a thesaurus to replace simple words with big, impressive multisyllabic ones, it would come across as genius prose. I know that approach all too well because that's how I used to write stories back when I was 17 years old and thought that if I just used big enough words, everyone would think I was super clever. Word of advice: it doesn't. It makes you look like a pretentious twat, especially when the words you end up using are, although technically accurate, so out of place and bizarre that no person would ever speak like this in real life.
From now on, any violating activity or evidence related to T. Malkit's assassination should be documented in this journal and ultimately filed in a case report back at the office.
Violating, huh? Sounds like Vice should get involved.
Could they be wrong? Is there ever a scenario where I have the lead instead?
You tell me, buddy. I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about.
There's a fucking snake among us, sir. You must attend the office station right now.
Now, this sentence is uttered by a police officer who really wants the chief to get his ass to somewhere. I guess he's a slam poet in his off time?
And then there's Mum. I can't picture her visage normally.
I can't process the word visage normally.
During an explanatory transmission with the chief, another disorienting vision occurred.
Oh, I love a good explanatory transmission. They're my favorite kind of transmissions. And here's the best one.
I'm undeniably entertaining daring thoughts. However, indications of this kind can't be disregarded.
Just, what the fuck? What does that even mean? Anyway, our boy James here is a homicide
Homicide.
Anyway, he suffers from some sort of psychosis, and he needs to take pills to keep the hallucinations at bay. Despite what you might call a significant handicap that could easily affect his judgment, he's still on the force and sent out to investigate a murder that happened in a giant mansion. Don't worry, it's not haunted, at least not as far as I know. The only haunting going on here is all in James's head, because of course Detective of the Year here forgot his fucking anti-batshit pills before heading out to investigate, and instead of just getting back in his car and swinging by a nearby pharmacy to restock before heading back to Casa del Spooky, James is just like, oh well, let's get cracking. Fucking what, dude? Because predictably things start unraveling pretty damn quick for old Jamesy here. It doesn't take long for him to start hearing a strange voice telling him to stick around, and on the opposite end of the welcoming spectrum, seeing apparitions of this lady with the IDDQD eyes that keeps telling him to fuck off and leave her alone. I'm getting mixed signals here, but we've got a job to do, so let's press on. Turns out the dead dude was involved with some pretty weird cultish shit, and his house is full of locked doors that have been bolted with chains and a vast collection of identical portraits, presumably of the mansion's deceased owner and his extended family. Okay, we need to talk about the gameplay here for a bit because this took me by surprise. Even though it's a first-person 3D game, you can't just go wherever you want. No, this game uses node-based navigation, 7th Guest style, and sure you can look around the location freely with your mouse, but you are essentially glued to the floor unless you click one of these absolutely gargantuan fuck-me lights. Seriously, the first time I saw one of these, I thought there was a ghost in James's house. I mean, the guy is supposed to be crazy, right? But no, this is how navigation in the game works, and it gets very distracting as the game goes on, especially when you approach a node and one of these giant fucking Star Trek transporter beams suddenly jump scare you out of the corner of your eye. Whatever happened to beckoning skeleton hands? Also, every once in a while, you'd come across an open door or a clearly accessible staircase that James just doesn't feel like exploring. There's no reason why I shouldn't be able to go up the staircase, but the absence of a fuck me light means that the game has just decided on my behalf that this isn't where I'm supposed to go at the moment. And yeah, 7th Guest did the same shit where doors were locked until you solved certain puzzles, whereupon they suddenly, as if by magic, unlocked. But that was a ghost story, and James is very much not a ghost, at least as far as I know. Again, I didn't play far enough to find out, although I gave the game a good 3 hours of my time, which is more than I usually put into the games I cover in this series. Anyway, within less than half an hour, James is already tripping balls and finds himself walking around full-on immersive hallucinatory environments that are entirely disconnected from the mansion, not to mention reality itself, and then the walls start feeling him up. High five! I will say this, the game does deliver on its promise of embodying a character that only has the flimsiest of grasps on his sanity, and I am here for it. Despite everything I've just said, the game still had me hooked for a good 3 hours or so because I love this sort of shit, and I couldn't wait to see what curveballs the game was going to throw at me next. So, would I recommend? It depends. The story seems intriguing, the puzzles are simple and unintrusive, even a bit handholdy at times, but that just means you're not getting bogged down with pointless head scratches instead of concentrating on the mystery. But you have to get past the actual mechanics. I have nothing against note-based navigation, but in a full 3D game, it's an odd choice, and the navigation frequently cock-blocks you from exploring places for no real reason. The menus are also a clusterfuck of nested menus with no less than 3 separate menu items for James's notes if you count the objectives list, which you should, and there are a lot of keyboard shortcuts that you have to memorize and you can't rebind, which gets surprisingly overwhelming when you're just trying to have a good time having your sense of reality scrambled. On the plus side, the devs seem very keen on user feedback, to the point where if you play the game on stream and mention something you don't particularly care for, even a minor detail, they will send you a detailed questionnaire about why you think so, which I thought was a little precious, but at least they're committed to improving the game. In fact, most or all of the things I've griped about in this review might have been fixed by the time you're watching this, so yeah, give this a whirl if you like Layers of Fear and want more in that same vein. Let's press on. Yeah, I gotta admit, I was not expecting to like this one as much as I ended up doing. The art style on the Steam banner had me worried because, honestly, to me it looks like the sort of obnoxious, low-effort YouTube kitsch slop that's mass-produced by Russian content farms, but I was wrong about that. When it's moving, the art and animation actually reminds me more of the peak of Newgrounds in the early 2000s, or the age of wildly experimental animation that somehow made it on TV back in the late 90s like Liquid Television. Side note, where's my gritty live-action Netflix reboot of The Head? It's the sort of heavily exaggerated expressive art style that has about 4 frames of animation for every loop and makes the most of all of them. Another thing I was wrong about was the sense of humor. Again, based on my initial impression of the screenshots, I thought I was gonna be in for the sort of try-hard, goofy shit where characters constantly spout groan-inducing, fourth-wall-breaking shit about how they know they're in an adventure game and every obstacle is so convoluted for no reason. I was not expecting existential stoner comedy delivered in a South African accent that spouts philosophical life lessons to a high-strung cat who's literally named Pregnant Cat and makes poignant observations about the invasive infestation of AI.
Did you know? Soon the internet will be flooded with AI-generated content. It'll drive real humans away from the internet until someone creates a new AI-free internet.
Message!
The game keeps things wonderfully surreal at every turn and seems to revel in the sort of lol-so-random shit that I personally find hilarious, like the fact that their next-door neighbor is a sentient piece of bread who will readily admit that he's psychotically insane.
I'm insane, Bru. Criminally insane.
Some of the references are a bit dated. There's a button dedicated to dabbing, which you can perform at any time in front of any character and get a response, usually one telling you to knock it off. But I'm pretty sure dabbing went out of style about 10 years or so ago. Still, it's a fun mechanic, and the overall idea of having a button dedicated to performing an action that serves no purpose other than providing a little bit of extra humor is fantastic. The puzzles adhere to the sort of surreal cartoon logic that you'd expect from a game that revels in its own absurdity, but they never devolve into complete moon logic as long as you stay on board with the demented stoner vibe. The gameplay itself is a pretty simple single-click affair that nonetheless onboards you with a surprisingly endearing Portal-inspired tutorial complete with overwrought narration that echoes the glory of Gary Owens in Space Quest 4 and 6. There's no need for this tutorial to be here. Even a zygote could easily pick up this game's mechanics within seconds, but I'm glad it's here because it's funny. I guess my main complaint about Ben and Boegie Episode 1 is that it's too short and the fact that it's episodic. Making this an episodic series is going to be a serious detriment to its success, and it's going to be hard for the developers to keep players hooked on a continuing series unless they dole out new episodes at a fairly snappy rate. And even then, the devs really shot themselves in the foot with this approach because they are going to see a massive drop-off of players between episodes. People just don't have the attention span to keep up with a continuing series. Even if the devs wanted to try keep every episode sort of self-contained, as the ending of Episode 1 suggests, they would have been better off making a single game that includes every episode rather than expect people to remember when a new episode is going to drop months apart from the previous releases. It's just a sad fact of how the gaming landscape is at the moment when there's so many games coming out every day all competing for attention, and I should know. So anyway, would I recommend? Well, like I said, I didn't expect to like this as much as I did, and that's chiefly because the screenshots and the description on the Steam page kind of make it out to be something it's not. It's not a whimsical cartoon adventure with adorably silly characters characters. It is certifiably batshit, absurdist, almost Dada-esque at times, and I wish the developers would lean more into those aspects when promoting the game, because pretending it's just a cutesy little cartoon game is going to turn off people expecting a Saturday morning cartoon-esque affair, and the way it is now is turning people away who actually enjoy a solid boost of non-sequiturs and obviously marijuana-fueled dialogue. So yeah, get that milk, boyo. Next. Okay, hold on to something. This game is a point-and-click adventure game that's also a rail shooter, that's set in the Wild West, that's also anime. What the fuck? Is this what happens when you try to design a game by drawing out of a hat? Is this game's like a road sign at a crossroads that points in every compass direction and all have the same destination written on it? So you'd think this mishmash of influences and styles would snap immediately like a thinly stretched gossamer fabric, or at least turn into the sort of confusing clusterfuck where 50% of players will end up hating at least 50% of the game and the other 50% will hate the other half of the game. I mean, even the setup is enough to give you whiplash. You play as this lovely young waifu named Bonnie, who's a famous gunslinger with a traveling circus, who's also a raging alcoholic. Trust me, she will remind you of this at every opportunity. And her primary goal for this adventure, I shit you not, is to find some hooch. Which is made all the more difficult because at the start of the game, the circus has arrived at a new town, and much to the dismay of our pistol princess here, it's a dry town, and the local saloon only sells fruit juice. Blech. In the very first scene of the game, Bonnie's woken up by the circus manager who tells us it's time to go to work despite Bonnie having a raging hangover, and I immediately shoot him in the nuts. Rather than result in a game over, Bonnie's then sent to jail because it turns out this is one of those "this character will remember this and that" kind of games. We're told that Captain Nutless over here is going to be just fine and that he posted bail, which is awfully nice of him given that we just crushed his ability to ever start a family. If, however, you decide not to blast his reproductive organs off, you'll head off into the circus tent and begin a little tutorial shooting section. Now, the shooting does indeed work as it does in stuff like Virtua Cop and House of the Dead, in that your cursor turns into crosshairs and you just point and click at what you want to shoot. You do have to draw your gun and reload manually, and I didn't find any keyboard shortcuts for these actions because the main menu consists entirely of New Game, Quit, and More, with More just being a link to the game's Steam page. Okay. So, no options menu, and somewhat infuriatingly, no save games either. That's right, you can't save your game at all. All you can do is live with your decisions, which is not ideal because there are a lot of decisions in this game. Some will result in you facing down a few gun barrels, but others just influence what other characters think of you. And having to replay the whole fucking game just because you may have accidentally picked the wrong dialogue option or gone into the wrong room is not ideal. That said, the shooting actually isn't that bad. In fact, it's very lenient. You can't just blast away at your opponents, but they will helpfully display little exclamation marks above their heads when they're in a state where they can take damage, and the game gives you plenty of leeway because they rarely seem to shoot back at you. I'm sure this gets more difficult the further you get into the game, but as far as this demo goes, I had no trouble with gunfights, and I am shit at action sequences in general. In the saloon shootout, you're up against 3 opponents, but one of them goes down in one hit, and the other 2 guys apparently forgot where the trigger on their guns were. Later you fight this dreamboat with the fancy anime hair, and he will literally just dance around on screen for what seems like several minutes and not shoot at you at all while you just stand out in the open and fumble with your gun. I shot him in the dick as well. The art style is really gorgeous, and the soundtrack lovingly echoes the sort of 8-bit chiptune stuff you'd find in JRPGs of the NES and SNES era. In fact, the only thing I really didn't care for is the adventure interface. It's the sort of hold down the button to bring up the verbs affair like Full Throttle, and you do have an inventory, but anytime you can use an inventory item on something, the UI just gives it away. Like you find this chisel in the jail cell. Don't ask me why there's a chisel in a jail cell. That seems like a bit of an oversight to me. And then when you click on the barred window, it just says, "Oh, would you like to use a chisel here?" And yeah, sure, but I would also like to solve a puzzle instead of just being handed the solution, you know what I mean? Also, characters in this game will just not shut the fuck up. Now, normally I'd be delighted that the game has a lot of flavor dialogue, because that sort of shit keeps the game world alive, but unlike classic adventure games, this game doesn't pause when characters are talking. You can look around the environment while the NPCs are still talking, which they do all the time. Even when you're not engaging them directly, they'll just start yapping at each other, and you end up having to try to read several lines of dialogue all at the same time. So seriously, if you're one of those Let's Players who likes to read dialogue out loud, this is your nightmare. And even when it's just a one-on-one conversation, it's still overwhelming. In the first room of the game, you've got this noisy cunt breathing in your ear constantly while you're still trying to work out the controls, and this end boss guy with the fancy footwork was being such a chatty bitch that I just shot him in the dick mid-sentence, which mercifully skipped the rest of the dialogue and just put me into the gunfight immediately. Still, it's a good game and a solid effort by a single dev who's clearly very passionate about what they do, so would I recommend? Yeah, absolutely. The art is fantastic, the writing feels authentic, and the gameplay is pretty satisfying. So don't be put off by the fact that there are gunfights in the game, because they're really very easy to deal with. Still, I would have liked the difficulty setting for the gunfights. Even though I didn't have any trouble with them, some might find them either too easy or too hard. Maybe even an option to play in adventure mode where the gunfights are entirely skippable. And when you're going down that route, maybe you also have an arcade mode where the story just unfolds on rails and all you get to play are the gunfights. And can I get an achievement for shooting everyone in the dick? Because that would be swell. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The first priority for this dev, above everything else I've just mentioned, is to implement a fucking save game system, and then we can talk about quality of life upgrades. Thank you. And that's it. That's all I got. 6 games that I played 3 months ago, and if you follow my second channel, the SQH Dumping Grounds, none of what I just said in this video was even the slightest bit surprising, since I already posted my full playthroughs with commentary over there 3 months ago. But if you're a game developer or publisher who doesn't mind being treated with utter disrespect, then by all means continue sending me your demos or even full games. I think I've made it pretty clear by now that it won't do you any good. In fact, it could be actively detrimental to your success, but then again, the world doesn't need any more of this AI-generated bullshit, so if you insist on polluting the earth and skyrocketing the cost of RAM just to make a game, please do me the favor of keeping it to yourself at least. So that's all for now, folks. See you around the Chrono Stream. Bye, bye, bye. Bye.